What about the human element of this? You're a human rights lawyer. You're always talking about the rights of individuals. But what about these thousands of Chagossians? Mostly living in Crawley, some living up here in the Midlands as well. What about their rights?
He said he has never lost a fight in his life. But what if the fight was already over and nobody told him? 18 days. That is all it took to destroy the inner circle of a man who won the biggest Labour landslide in a generation. On February the 8th, Morgan McSweeney, the architect of Labour's 2024 election victory, Keir Starmer's closest political advisor for 6 years, resigned. Gone. On the same day, Tim Allen, Starmer's communications director, also walked. Two of the most powerful figures in Downing Street cleared out in a single weekend. And then, on Monday, came something that has not happened in British political life in living memory. Anas Sarwar, the leader of Scottish Labour, publicly called for a Labour Prime Minister to resign, not a Conservative, not Reform, his own side. If you've never seen a government unravel in real time, you're watching one now. And if you want to understand how we got here, stay with me. Because the story behind this collapse is far more disturbing than the headlines suggest. Subscribe if you want the full picture on British politics. We're covering this as it breaks. Let's start with the thing that should have ended this government's credibility on its own. During Prime Minister's questions, Keir Starmer admitted to MPs that security vetting had flagged Peter Mandelson's continued relationship with Jeffrey Epstein before his appointment as ambassador to the United States. The vetting flagged it. Questions were asked, and then the appointment was made anyway. Read that again, slowly. The vetting raised the alarm. The questions were put to Mandelson, and Starmer's government sent him to Washington regardless. When the full extent of that relationship later became public, Starmer's response was to claim Mandelson had lied throughout the vetting process. So you are left with one of only two possible conclusions. Either the vetting system failed at a fundamental level, which is what McSweeney effectively admitted in his resignation letter, or the vetting worked perfectly, the risk was understood, and a political calculation was made to proceed anyway. There is no third option, and neither version of this story is defensible. The Economist has called the Mandelson affair Britain's worst political scandal of this century. A remarkable claim given the competition, the expenses scandal, unlawful prorogation of Parliament, Partygate. And yet when you look not just at what Mandelson is alleged to have done, but at what his appointment reveals about the judgment of the government that made it and then spent months defending it, the claim holds. Now here is what the mainstream coverage keeps getting wrong about Nigel Farage. His critics ask, fairly, what exactly he proposes to do differently. His policy platform is thin in places. His claim that reform would stop the small boats within 2 weeks of legislation will not survive contact with reality, and Farage almost certainly knows that. But that is not what is driving his numbers, and understanding why that is matters more than anything else in British politics right now. By September 2025, just 14 months after Labour's historic landslide, polling showed Reform on 29% and Labour on 21%. That collapse did not happen because Farage is a genius, though he is a skilled political operator. It happened because Starmer handed him the ammunition, piece by piece, decision by decision, reversal by reversal. Every welfare cut announced and then quietly dropped. Every minister who resigned or was found to have breached standards. Every press conference where the language of accountability was deployed to avoid any actual accountability. Farage didn't manufacture the story. He just kept showing up with the receipts. And the people moving toward reform are not moving because they've carefully evaluated his policy program. They are moving because they feel betrayed. And Farage is the only political figure who will say the word betrayal out loud, without qualifiers, without spin, without a communications director crafting the messaging. That is a powerful force. At certain moments in political history, it is more powerful than policy. On the 5th of September, as Reform opened its 2025 conference in Birmingham, news broke of Angela Rayner's resignation as Deputy Prime Minister. Reform's leadership spotted it immediately. They pushed Farage's keynote speech forward by 3 hours, so he would be the first of Starmer's opponents to address the country on the day the Deputy PM walked. Think about what that decision reveals about the two operations. While number 10 was managing a cabinet reshuffle, issuing careful statements about standards and process, and the importance of taking responsibility, Farage was on a stage in front of 6,000 people, using that crowd's energy as a broadcast signal to the entire country. He didn't need sophistication, he just needed to be there, confident, composed, and unapologetic, while the government burned. Reform insiders reported texts from members of the public afterwards saying it looked like they finally had a prime minister in waiting. A prime minister in waiting with 5 parliamentary seats. The absurdity of that would be funny if it weren't so politically lethal. Business leaders attended Reform's conference for the first time. Professor John Curtis, the most authoritative polling analyst in Britain, wrote that if an election were held today, Reform would be the largest party, likely short of an overall majority, but the largest party, and the largest party in a hung parliament typically forms the government. These are no longer fringe numbers, these are governing numbers. In February 2026, a YouGov poll for The Times found that 51% of respondents believed Keir Starmer was either more sleazy or as sleazy as Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson, the man who threw parties in Downing Street during a national lockdown, the man whose government became synonymous with a near-total absence of standards in public life. Keir Starmer, the former director of public prosecutions, the man who built his entire political identity on seriousness and integrity and a different kind of politics, is now seen by a majority of the British public as equivalent to, or worse than, Boris Johnson for sleaze. If you want a single number that captures the scale of what has happened to this Prime Minister's credibility, that is it. And inside Labour, the reckoning is already underway. Before Christmas, before the Mandelson arrest, before McSweeney's resignation, before the Scottish Labour leader went public, one cabinet minister was asked what the trigger for a leadership contest would be. They shrugged and said, May is the obvious moment of danger, but all you need is 80 Labour MPs to get behind one name, and they are so cross about so many things. That conversation happened before any of this. Since then, those MPs have seen considerably more than they bargained for. The names circulating are now familiar. Wes Streeting, Angela Rayner, who despite her own resignation over a tax scandal would beat Starmer in a head-to-head contest among Labour members, and Andy Burnham, the Greater Manchester Mayor, who, despite not currently being an MP, is preferred as Prime Minister over Farage by the country as a whole. The country as a whole prefers Burnham over Farage. It does not prefer Starmer over Farage. That is the position of the sitting Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Starmer told his MPs, "Every fight I have ever been in, I have won." But Nigel Farage did not pick a fight with Keir Starmer. He picked up a mirror and held it up. And what the country saw in that mirror, the appointments, the vetting failures, the reversals, the confessions dressed up as resignations, is not something you can argue your way out of. You cannot win an exposure. You can only survive it or be consumed by it. The by-election results will come. The local elections in May will come. The Mandelson documents the government has been forced to release will come. And through all of it, Farage will be there, pointing at the wreckage with that familiar expression of satisfaction that has never quite managed to look like surprise. Because nothing that has happened has surprised him. Starmer said he has never lost a fight. The question now is whether he understands that this particular fight ended some time ago, and that the verdict has already been delivered, not by a court, by the country. If this kind of deep, no-spin analysis is what you come here for, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We cover British politics the way it deserves to be covered, fully, factually, and without fear. Share this if someone you know needs to understand what is actually happening to this government. The comment section is open. Tell me, is Starmer finished, or can he survive this?